We're going to be, first of all, we're going to cover things that you need to think about in terms of how many certificates of sponsorship you're going to need for the coming year. We're going to have a quick think about looking at salaries and planning recruitment, things like that. And then Sam is going to cover some fairly major changes that are going to kick in on the 4th of April this year, so they're coming up quite quickly. So I'm just going to start by looking at your undefined certificates of sponsorship. So just as a reminder, undefined certificates of sponsorship are the certificates that you can use to sponsor people who are already living in the United Kingdom. So that might be workers who are already working for you on skilled worker visas who are going to need to extend their visa for another few years. And you might also use these for workers who are already working for you on a different type of visa, but that visa is going to come to an end and you want to continue employing them, so you're going to sponsor them. You might also use this type of certificate for someone who is who's a new hire, who's already living in the UK but who's new to your business. And April can be a good time to have a look at how many certificates you've got and how many you're going to need, partly so that you can cost that in, because there are fees associated with assigning certificates of sponsorship, and it's worth knowing what those are going to be. For those of you who have older sponsor licenses, you may find that your renewal comes up in April. So all sponsors get an annual allocation of undefined certificates. Historically, those were renewed every April, which is why for those of you with older licenses might find that you tend to renew in April. Those of you with newer licenses, your allocations may renew at a different time. It doesn't matter when they renew, but it's still a good idea at this point in time to have a look at how many you're going to need. And the reason for that is that, aside from the cost associated with it, the standard processing time to request undefined certificates of sponsorship is 18 weeks from the Home Office, which is a really long time to be waiting for an allocation of certificates that you really need in order to sponsor someone who maybe needs to make an application fairly soon. There is the potential of getting priority service, but again, that is a bit of a lottery. There are a limited number of slots available for priority service for this kind of consideration, and the Home Office will make you pay an extra £200 for the privilege. So it's worth spending the time having to think about how many you're going to need in the coming year and making that request to the Home Office fairly early, and this is always a really good time to do it. The other thing that it's worth having a think about at this time of year, when again you're doing your budgeting for the coming financial year, is having a look at the salaries that are going to be required for those workers who do perhaps need to extend their visa or who might be coming up to applying for indefinite leave to remain. The Home Office do update both the threshold rate and the going rates that are set out in the immigration rules on a fairly regular basis in order to keep up with inflation. Sam's going to talk about some more significant changes that are coming up in due course. But again, if you do have workers who maybe their salary isn't quite meeting the relevant rate, the going rate for their role or the threshold at the minute, and they're going to have to make an application in the next 12 months, now's a good time to just have a look at what they're going to need to be on in order to make sure that they're able to make those applications later in the year and get that all budgeted in and sorted out. Finally, whilst you're doing all that, whilst you're logging into the SMS and thinking about how many certificates you need and things like that, it is always a good opportunity to have a quick review of your license and make sure that everything is up to date that ought to be up to date. That could be making sure that the details of all your key personnel are correct, that all of the addresses that you have on file that are listed on the SMS are still the correct ones if you've moved. It also might be making sure that any reports have been made. So that might be reports related to individual workers, those should normally be done within 10 days, but if you have missed any, this is a good opportunity to just catch up on those. And similarly, any changes that relate to your organisation, so for example, if there's been a change of ownership, or any other changes relating to the business itself, for example, if the size of the business has changed from being perhaps a small business and moved into being a medium business, that's something that you really need to report. And again, this would be a good time to be catching up on that. And it's something that may become apparent around this time of year. We do have a whole other video on reporting, if you want to go back and look at that. But also, this is what we advise on all the time. So if you do have any concerns about your license, if you do think that there are things that you might need to report, or you're not sure about that, you need some guidance, or you'd like us to help you just have a quick review of your license, then that's something that we can always assist you with. And so I'm now just going to pass over to Sam. Sam's going to take us through some quite major changes to the immigration rules that are going to come in shortly.
So, the immigration rule changes are the kind of main topic of the moment. I think it's worth mentioning up top what we broadly understood to be the case coming into the changes, because things are slightly different than were advertised. These changes were announced in October last year, and the actual detail of the changes was released on Wednesday or Thursday last week. The changes run to about 300 pages, so what we're going to go through today is only intended to be the kind of key, most important information that you need to know. If you have more complicated queries, or if there's anything that's not clear, by all means get in touch with us. So for those who are existing clients, and we've been talking about this for the last few months, you will know that we were expecting broadly that the overall salary threshold was going to go up to 38,700, and that we were not expecting the existing workers, so people who are already skilled workers on the route, to be affected. We were also expecting the general salary thresholds to go up, so the going rate thresholds, which we will cover in a moment. Unfortunately, the government have introduced changes that were not previously announced in addition to these. But again, we will cover that now. So yeah, the first increase is the minimum salary threshold that has gone up from 26,400 to 38,700. There has been an increase in the going rate, as expected, from the 25th percentile to the 50th percentile. Don't worry about that terminology, I will cover that momentarily. The shortage occupation discount, so that 20% discount to the going rate, that has been scrapped. Along with the shortage occupation list itself, it has been replaced by something known as the immigration salaries list, which is shorter, but it will give a flat rate discount of £30,960 per year. The jobs on the national pay scales are exempt, so the government have exempted their own workers from these requirements, or at least people who are on those national pay scales, such as doctors, nurses, teachers, and so on. Leading on from that, health and social care roles are also exempt from these changes, so we'll have a slightly lower salary threshold. And there are some provisions that have been maintained, although this is calculated slightly differently. So new entrants to the labour market, they will benefit from a 20% discount to their going rates. Their flat rate, and I believe it's a 30% discount to their going rate. It's worth mentioning that new entrants to the labour market are not new people coming into the UK. New entrants are defined as people who have recently graduated, who are switching from student visas, graduate visas, or in professional training, or are under the age of 26. It's worth mentioning there's about 6 different ways that you can qualify to be a new entrant, so if there's any part of that that's unclear, by all means let us know, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that more. Additionally, the transitional provisions are for people who are already skilled workers on the 4th of April. Now, the key distinction for that is that it applies to people whose certificate of sponsorship has been assigned on that date. So even if the application itself hasn't gone in by the 4th of April, as long as you've assigned that certificate of sponsorship, your worker will be qualifying under the transitional provisions. So if we move on to the next slide, percentiles. So obviously on the previous slide we mentioned that things are moving from the 25th percentile to the 50th percentile. Don't worry about that terminology too much. The way that it's calculated for transparency is that the going rates within the immigration rules are based on the ASH survey. So that's the annual survey of hours and earnings. That gives a range of salaries for each occupation code. So let's say that your occupation had a salary range of 0 to 100,000. The 50th percentile would be 50,000 and the 25th percentile would be 25,000. So think of it more as percentages. The rule was previously that you needed to make about 25% of that range. It is now really that middle point, that median salary. However, it doesn't matter too much how it's calculated because the Home Office do publish a list of going rates. So if you're ever unclear about how much the minimum salary is, then that is available within the immigration rules. There is a table of salary rates, and they are going to be publishing a 50th percentile going rate table and a 25th percentile going rate table. So that means that regardless of whether your employee is on the transitional provisions or they're on the new rules, it's going to be fairly easy to reference what they should be paid. The going rates and the occupation codes are based on ONS data. So this isn't things that are decided by the Home Office themselves, although they set those boundaries. The actual salaries are identified by an objective body. So changes in the standard occupation codes. This is the other bit that was not necessarily advertised, but not a huge surprise. So previously, the Home Office occupation codes have been based on Office of National Statistics data, and that were occupation codes defined in 2010. They've used these new rules as an opportunity to update the occupation codes to the 2020 occupation codes, and that has a bit of a wider impact on eligibility under this route. So some of these codes have been renumbered, some of these have been deleted or merged, and some new occupation codes have been introduced as well. The side effect of this is that you will need to be reviewing your existing employees, so particularly those who are having extensions and who are covered by the transitional provisions, to ensure that you understand what occupation code they're going to be on when you are looking to extend their visa or help them when they're looking to apply for settlement, because this will be relevant. Because regardless of transitional provisions, everyone is now assessed on these 2020 occupation codes. In terms of wider consequences for the route, the Migration Advisory Committee, who are the people who have looked at the feasibility of these changes and who have defined the immigration salary list, their view is that the effect of all of these increases and these changes is that most people who are now going to be eligible are either going to be new entrants, so those younger people who are coming out of university, entering professional training or under the age of 26, or people who are remaining on those transitional provisions, because the reality is where we were previously seeing lots of roles with going rates in the 20,000, 30,000, now many of these going rates being up to the 50th percentile are in the 40, 50,000 pound range. So that's a very big increase. It's also worth mentioning that even under those transitional provisions, these going rates have been increased due to inflation as well. So here are the general requirements. Just a few things to highlight to you here. I'm not going to read all of these out to you. We will be distributing these slides, so you'll be able to look at these in your own time. But you can see that there are various discounts remaining in place for people on PhDs, people who have PhDs in STEM subjects in particular, where those PhDs are relevant to the job, where a job is on the immigration salary list, or where they are a new entrant. So there is a cascading range of discounts there. But remember that this flat rate of, for example, under the general rate, 38,700, or the going rate, you need to pay them the higher of those numbers. Looking at the transitional provisions, so these are for people already assigned a COS or already holding a visa by the 4th of April. The general flat rate is going to start at £29,000. So again, this is where they were saying things weren't going to be affected, but actually they have put that base rate up slightly. So the new starting rate is up from 26,400 to 29,000 for existing workers. And they will be assessed on the 25th percentile, or that hourly rate of £11.90. Again, whichever of those is higher. And once again, in the same way as under those standard rules, there is a cascading level of discounts available here. So here is an example of the increase in the fees. So I've done this exercise with a couple of my clients on calls already, where we've been looking at certificates. So the idea of this is to look at where you have somebody who, if you were sponsoring them today versus what you will be sponsoring them under the new rules. So production managers, for example, under the current rules, you would pay them need to pay them £35,000 because this is the going rate of the rules. So the going rate is higher than 26,400, so that's why we're at 35,000. Under the transitional provisions, they're still assessed on that 25th percentile, but due to inflation, that salary requirement has increased to 37,100. And under the new rules, if they were not subject to transitional provisions, that's going all the way up to 51,500, because that's that middle point, that 50%. Similarly, with mechanical engineer, the reason we've included this occupation is because it's currently a shortage occupation, which means it is subject to a discount on the going rate. That salary under the current rates would be £33,000. Under the transitional provisions, because it's still eligible, the worker would still be eligible, it's 35,600. It is not listed on the immigration salary list, so this is one of those shortage occupations that's just falling out of the rules. So while they are still eligible for the visa, they won't get an additional discount, and therefore they would need to be paid 35,600. And then finally, under the new rules, they would need to be paid 42,500. This is a good example of a role that was previously a shortage occupation that is not included on the immigration salary list. What we are finding with a lot of the roles that have been removed from this list, they tend to be roles that are engineering or software development roles. They are now just assessed under the standard rules. Now, in practice, I think our personal experience has been that, particularly within the software development sector, most people are tending to earn above that 50th percentile anyway, just because of the high demand for workers. But there are going to be some roles that are caught out by this, so it's worth keeping an eye on your existing workers. And again, here is the immigration salary list, just screenshotted. Again, this will be available for reference once the slides have been distributed. But one of the key things to highlight here is how significantly reduced it is compared to the shortage occupation list. But also, if you look at the column headings, you will see that it is now split by nation in the UK. So whether you're in England, Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland will also have an impact on whether the role is eligible for the immigration salary list. For example, that top code there, 1212, managers and proprietors in forestry, etc., is only on the salary list in Scotland. So this is just the second page, again giving you a full breakdown of the salary list. And then finally, the global business mobility route is also affected, but in much more minor ways. So the general salary threshold in this route is increasing from 45,000 to 48,500, so that's a slightly smaller increase. The general salary for graduate trainees on the route will increase from 24,220 to 25,410. You're still able to rely on the 25th percentile for senior or specialist workers, and again, those that 70% discount and 25th percentile for going rates for graduate trainees will remain the same, and similarly with high earners, the threshold is 73,900. So there is some minor changes on the global business mobility route, but they are fairly minor. The one aspect that we've not covered so far that I think is important to mention is those defined certificates of sponsorship. We are aware that there are a huge number of people applying for defined certificates at the moment. We ourselves are seeing delays for our own clients in terms of those requests, where they were previously being decided within one working day or so. They tend to be taking much longer. We've explained already that you need to have assigned the certificates by the 4th of April, or specifically the end of the day on the 3rd of April, in order for your workers to rely on the old rules. It is worth highlighting that the new government guidance has said that the SMS is going to be closing for new requests on DCOSs on the evening of the 2nd of April. And if your request for a certificate of sponsorship has not been decided by that date, it will automatically be cancelled. So if you haven't received the cost by then, even if they would qualify under the new rules, you will need to resubmit a request on the 4th of April. They have said that they will try and process as many requests as possible before then, but it's difficult to say from an outsider's perspective exactly how many of those they're going to get through. So I'll hand back over to Lydia now, who will wrap things up.
Thank you very much, Sam. Okay. So yes, one final change that's coming in that I will take you through briefly. Potentially a piece of good news is that you will no longer need to renew your sponsor licence. So from the 6th of April, all new licences that are granted will be indefinite, and all of those who already have a sponsor licence, the expiry date will automatically be extended by 10 years. This is obviously a benefit to you in that it means that you don't have to pay the fee to renew your licence after 4 years. So that is a positive in many ways. That said, I think I would just flag up a couple of potential pitfalls that you're going to just need to be aware of. Quite often in my experience, that 4-year mark when you were contacted to renew your licence was often another of those opportunities for people to just check back in, make sure that everything was up to date, make sure that all of their key personnel were in place, for example. That just sort of 4-yearly check-in point won't come round anymore. So again, it makes it even more important, I suppose, that you are on top of your sponsor license compliance and your reporting and so forth. The other thing is that when licenses were only granted for 4 years, if people were not using their license, and perhaps it maybe had fallen into the background a bit, then those licenses would just expire, and therefore your sponsor obligations will come to an end. Now, even if you're not using your sponsor license, even if you're not actually sponsoring any workers, your license will continue, and therefore your sponsor license obligations will also continue until such time as your license is either revoked or you choose to give it up. So that can be a bit of a danger, I think, that you end up almost with zombie licenses that people will have forgotten about potentially if they're not actually sponsoring any workers at the time. So I think for that reason, it just hammers home even harder why it is really important to have someone within your organisation who really takes ownership of the sponsor licence, and does have a good understanding of what is required there. Again, this is what we advise on all the time. So if you do feel that you maybe need a bit of help getting your sponsor license up to date, or maybe you've had a change of key personnel and someone coming in is feeling less confident about fulfilling that role, we are always here and are happy to assist you with advice on that. And that brings us to the end of this particular presentation. Just to recap, the major changes are coming in from the 4th of August. but you will need to realistically have assigned certificates of sponsorship by the evening of the 2nd of April 2024 in order to get those new hires onto the more favourable old rules and the transitional provisions. And on the plus side, sponsor licences will now be indefinite, but as always, it is always important to keep on top of your reporting and your sponsor licence obligations. We will now open for questions. We will say, as Sam said at the beginning, these changes come in a document that's almost 300 pages long and are really quite complicated. So we will do our best to answer questions that you might have to do with transitional provisions and the new rules. But if there's anything that we can't answer just off the top of our heads, we will take a note of the questions and who's asked them. And if we can, we'll follow up with you next week. So I'll just ask Caitlin if any questions have come in so far.
Yeah, so do the applicants have to make their visa applications by the 4th of April?
No. So the key date in the rules is the date that their certificate of sponsorship is signed, and that needs to be by the 4th. But as we said, realistically, it will need to be by the 2nd of April because you won't be able to access the SMS after the evening of that date. They can then make their applications later in the year as long as that COS is valid. So a COS is typically valid, well, it's always valid for 3 months from the date you issue it. So they will then have up to 3 months to get their applications in.
Perfect. And another one, what if we've requested a DCOS and not had a response yet?
That is something I've been dealing with a lot recently. We know that this is a really common problem. I think the key thing is do what you can in terms of chasing up the Home Office. There are email addresses available that the Home Office provide publicly in terms of requesting further information. So your first port of call should always be the business help desk, which you should have the contact email for within your letter of grant, or equally if you just search the business help desk. However, don't be surprised if you are seeing delays. We hear from other lawyers and from clients about requests that have been outstanding. I think the longest request I've heard outstanding at the moment is someone submitted one in November and still hasn't heard back. I recently have been doing one which we submitted at the beginning of January, and we're only just starting to get somewhere on it now. So I think the key thing is to chase the Home Office in terms of requesting further information. Again, by all means, contact us if you are experiencing difficulties. There are certain limits to what we can do if we're not named on your license, but we are always happy to have an initial conversation with you about ways in which we can support. But be prepared that if for any reason that it hasn't been granted by the end of the 2nd of April, unfortunately that will mean that it will automatically be cancelled. That's not because you've done anything wrong. It's not your fault. It is just because they're completely shifting the way that occupation codes are assessed, and the necessity of that means that there must be a cut-off point at some point. So it's frustrating. We share that frustration, but I think from now until the 2nd of April, the key thing is to make use of those avenues to chase up responses from the Home Office.
Amazing. And how do we tell when a UCOS allocation is going to expire?
Okay, good question. The easiest way is going to be to log into your sponsorship management system and look at the license summary section. Scroll down towards the bottom of that page and it will show you when your allocation is going to expire. You will have different allocations as well if you have different types of license. So for example, if you've got both skilled worker and global business mobility, you might have different allocations and different expiry dates for each of those routes, and they might be at different times, but that would be how you find them.
Perfect, and that's all for the Q&A. A final thing is that the Q&A feedback, a lot of it was saying that we weren't able to see the slides. We're aware this must be really difficult to follow on with such a complex topic, but please be assured that you'll get both the slides and the recording of the webinar afterwards. Anything that you're still unsure of, we'll be more than happy to answer via email, so please do just get in touch.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
In that case, we'll leave it there. Thank you for